everyone, welcome to another second channel discussion. So, if you haven't been paying attention to the competitive scene recently, about 9 days ago, Area Cup was won by a Carbon team. This was the team they were going against, and they played this composition, occasionally having Neo Splash instead of N-Zap. They won this, and in an earlier set, they fought the classic meta composition, all 4 weapons, and despite the counterpick system allowing for some brutally pencil-favored stages, they ended up defeating the Pencil team 3-2 as well in this tournament. I found that pretty interesting to think about. I was trying out some stuff with Moonlight, including Decapitator, and in a more recent tournament, this was the East versus West tournament, it was also won by a Carbon player in the grand final. So Carbon has won 2 major JP tournaments recently, and there was a little bit of Decapitator use here. So I want to talk a little bit about why Carbon is doing so well right now, as well as if I think Decapitator could potentially be similar to that. So that's what we're going to talk about today a little bit and try to play a little bit of catch up on these weapons, but I mostly think this is important to talk about Carbon first. Why is Carbon getting picked? What's it doing well on right now? And I think this is very, very similar to the rushdown style comp I talked about when I went over the meta last on the main channel. We saw stuff like Tetra a little bit there, but I think this is a much better evolution of the rushdown comp. Rather than going coolerless potentially, or relying on Tetra, which I believe has a weaker kit, this is doubling down on the double cooler and opting for Carbon instead. Carbon obviously isn't going to be as mobile or go as far in as a Tetra will, but I think Carbon still has a good amount of speed and plays much more to killing power, so much that I believe this comp is really built around Carbon and Squeezer specifically. You might notice that this comp has the heavy edit spiraling instead of pencil as well, and pen can definitely still be ran on this comp, and I think might be better on the few of the maps, but pen and zap are typically what we've seen with this, or potentially Neo Splash for maps where you need a bit more help getting in, or paint. I think that the double cooler really allows you to play a lot more aggressively, but I think the other factor is double cooler for Carbon and Squeezer specifically. These 2 weapons both have very strong kits. It's Wall Zuka and Burst Bomb Zuka. They're some of the best kits in the entire game, and some of the best kits for the respective weapons that they're on. However, both of them don't get a whole lot of Zukas. In a traditional comp, you'll typically see 3 or 4 Zukas maximum for these kind of weapons. However, by pairing it with double cooler, most of the deaths that are going to happen from the Carbon or Squeezer are going to have Special Saber, which means both of these weapons are going to be getting closer to 5 to 6 Zukas per game, just from what I've noticed on average. That is a lot higher of an amount, so now we have a double Zuka comp with weapons that are much better at fighting and much stronger main weapons than something like a Splatter Shot, while also not suffering from the poor output that they used to have. Double cooler makes this comp very snowbally on offense, and by playing around double cooler instead of no cooler, you don't have the risks associated with ditching the cooler entirely. Lockout is still very tricky for this comp, as you might imagine, which is why I think sometimes Neo Splash is picked instead of double cooler, but I think that it is very, very snowbally if you manage to get holds with this style of comp. The Squeezer covers the range disadvantage pretty well. I think that's pretty noteworthy on its own, and I think Carbon very much can thrive with this type of team composition if you take a look at it here, because I think that Carbon Roller's buffs have been very helpful in this patch. The vertical flick hitbox size has made it a little bit easier to connect vertical flicks, but I think the horizontal buff is actually the big winner here. The horizontal flick has about a line of range now where it will be able to one-shot, and that's not even including using your burst bomb to extend that kill range further. This has been the first time since Splatoon 1 that I believe Carbon horizontal has felt really crazy and strong. It is very, very good, so I think that Carbon can go for more reliable kills, and since then we've seen more of a QR build, the Carbon build for this tournament being 4 mains worth of quick respawn, and pretty much just using that so when they don't have cooler or their low Zuka charge, they can still go in for trades, and that makes them a lot less predictable. And I think this is a very interesting composition. It's clearly built around the Squeezer Carbon duo. It works quite well, and that's what we've seen in tournaments more recently. But what about Mint Decapitator as another option to this? Mint is pretty much just a long roller, and it also has a pretty interesting hit. Now, this is no Burst Bomb Zuka by any means, but Bubble is very good with dive comms as an extra landing point, and Decapitator also has a very large hitbox for a kill. I do think it's quite interesting, the mobility is good, and being able to have another lethal bomb is very solid. While I think Bubble has its limitations right now, these type of dive comps are definitely where I think it works best, and I think you're going to use this over Jetpack. Jetpack doesn't really fit with too many dive comps to me, unless if it is on the more defensive weapon and can be used to give jumps while keeping aggression. Charcoal isn't that, so I think in this case the Bomb and Bubble are a little bit better. However, I think that Decapitator does have one big problem compared to Carbon, and it's pretty obvious it's the weapon speed. Now, Decap is not as slow as it gets, typically talked about. I think that the weapon can be quick in the right moments, especially if you don't spam Charge Slash too much and know how to use your horizontal. However, when going for those quick one-shot kills, you're going to have that charge time, and I think the biggest issue with Decapitator is the ability for this Charge Slash to be interrupted by faster weapons. And so in general, I think while Carbon Roller has the speed to work around this disadvantage, Decapitator is a lot more up in the air. I do think what Decap has, though, is much better damage. One horizontal flick from this thing does 40, the Charge Slash does 80, and it makes it so that if you're running this with this dive comp, if you're doing a similar QR build with Decap, and you get some form of damage, whatever's on your comp is likely going to be able to kill whatever you're hitting if it's diving at a similar time. And that's really the idea with this comp, to really just rush down as fast as possible. So Decap works with this quite well. So I think that this is the style that Decap will be good with. I think if Decap is going to be in the meta, I think it's with this kind of pick. That isn't to say that's what everyone's doing. We did see one team run Decapitator in East versus West, the same JP tournament I talked about earlier, and they didn't win, but it was an attempt for sure, and Decap here was instead doing a Ninja Squid build and playing with a little bit more dive heavy of a comp, but a different idea, going with, a QR Special Saber dually. So you have Crab and Zuka to help get the Decapitator in, as well as being able to play off of the weapon speed with more mobile front lines. But I think this comp is a little bit more susceptible to counterpick, not just the issues that Decapitator has, but Dooley's pick in this comp is a little bit difficult. It's good in the sense that it's going to be able to output a good bit of Crab. In fact, it's running a main of Special Saber, if I remember correctly, which will probably help a lot for that specifically. But I think the matchups against more powerful midline weapons are going to be a lot trickier if you're going with the Dooley and Decap together, to where the matchups are a bit of a problem. And there's Squeezer to help cover this, which is very good into midlines, obviously. But I think this comp has a little bit more holes with it. I also just am not a big fan of Ninja Squid style builds right now. I think that the meta is shifting to try to be more quick. I think if you're going to counterpick against more defensive weapons like the meta comp we've been seeing, or even AoE stuff like Bucket and Range Blaster that we're seeing a good bit in West paired with 52, speed is really the name of the game in order to take this kind of stuff down, and I think that these faster, quick respawn builds and types of comps are the best chance we have at changing up the meta a little bit. So while I think this is an interesting attempt and idea, I'm not too sure we'll see more of it. Final verdict on Decapitator, though. Do I think it's worth it? Not necessarily right now. I think Decap's main claim to fame would be on maps that Carbon isn't as good at, and there are definitely a few of them where I think we might see some Decap if someone like Omega wants to use it in West, or just a good player in Japan, obviously, using the weapon. However, I think for the most part, it's just easier to push Carbon on the maps it is bad at, because I think the weapon's buffs are so substantial that honestly, it's probably fine on maps like Mahi or Hagglefish if it's being played with that style of comp. I think just how much the weapon can dive in, and the higher output of Zuka makes Carbon much easier to run on maps where you would traditionally switch off. I could be wrong on this though, and there could be other maps that Carbon wouldn't want to be played on, and I think Decapitator is very close to working, but personally, I would like to see a little bit more buffs. I would only recommend it for a few specific maps for teams looking to do this kind of style, but who knows, Moonlight's definitely going to be trying out a little bit more, and we could always see some JP tournament run with weapons, so that's my thoughts on it right now. Thank you for watching.